The city of Lahore breathed in mist and dust, its morning sky smeared with gray. Beneath its restless hum, in narrow alleys soaked with rainwater and waste, lived the forgotten ones, street boys, orphans, and runaways who slept under bridges or at bus terminals. They were invisible to the world, but not to one man. His name was Javed Iqbal, a quiet and neatly dressed middle-aged man who owned a small house near Shadbag. Neighbors called him polite, almost too polite. He ran a youth welfare office, inviting poor boys inside for meals, small jobs, or shelter. No one questioned his intentions. Poverty numbed suspicion. For years, nothing about him stood out. He was just another face in the maze of the old city, blending into the chaos of handcarts, horns, and the smell of diesel and spice. Yet, behind his locked doors, a darkness was forming, a mind feeding on resentment and a strange hunger for control that it began subtly. A fascination with discipline, a need to break those who reminded him of his own humiliation. He kept diaries filled with details, photographs of boys he met, their names written with chilling precision. He believed himself to be a teacher, punishing those who had wronged him through others who symbolized them. Outside, Lahore moved unaware. The Ravi River flowed past the city's edge, carrying its filth and forgotten things. But soon, that river would carry something else, a whisper of horror that would travel from the slums to the police stations and then across the nation. The first disappearance was brushed aside as routine, a street child missing, probably fled elsewhere. Then another vanished, and another. But the streets were used to losing children. Nobody looked deeper, not yet. Inside his dimly lit room, Javed prepared meticulously. He recorded every step, every act, as though building a confession long before he would ever speak. In his mind, he was crafting justice, his own version of it, and when the horror finally surfaced, Lahore would never forget his name again. Lahore's winter grew colder that year. The fog crept in thick from the river, swallowing the city in silence. In a narrow lane near Shadbag, a small two-story house stood strangely spotless. Iron gate polished, curtains drawn, a faint smell of disinfectant leaking into the air. Few ever noticed it. Fewer ever entered. Inside, Javed Iqbal moved like a man obsessed with order. His world was arranged, photographs in neat rows, files stacked perfectly, and a diary that recorded everything: names, dates, places, and the final moments of every life he claimed to owe the outside world. His house was a welfare office for runaways. A signboard hung above the door offering food, work, and protection. For many young boys living on the streets, it looked like salvation. But the moment they stepped through that door, salvation became a trap. He didn't kill in rage. He killed with procedure, almost ritual. He would talk, feed them, earn their trust, and then erase them. No screams reached the street, no cries for help. The walls were too thick, and the city too loud to notice that he dissolved everything. The evidence, the bodies, in acid tubs hidden behind closed doors. He wrote each death in his notebook, numbering every victim, signing off each entry with a calm, cold hand. To him, this was justice, punishment for a past insult, revenge against a world that never saw him at night. He'd sit by the small window, watching the streetlights flicker through the fog. He wasn't haunted. He was proud. He believed he had done something meaningful, cleansing society of what he saw as corruption. But evil never stays buried forever. A strange odor began drifting from his house, one that neighbors couldn't quite explain. Dogs barked at his gate, stray cats disappeared from the lane, and a few locals whispered that something wasn't right. Then, one morning, Javed Iqbal vanished. When police broke into his home days later, they found his diary, every detail written with terrifying precision. In the basement, acid drums still bubbled, faintly dissolving what was left of the unthinkable. On the wall, a message in paint: "This is my punishment. I confessed to killing 100 children. The investigation had begun, but Javed was already gone, melted into the same city that had ignored him for so long. The confession sent shockwaves through Pakistan. Lahore awoke to a nightmare it couldn't comprehend. Newspapers screamed headlines about a man who claimed to have killed 100 children, a number too horrific to believe. Yet, the evidence inside that quiet Shadbag house left no room for doubt. Detective Iskar Ali was assigned to lead the case. He'd seen murders before, dozens of them, but never something that stripped humanity down to its bones like this. The air inside Javed Iqbal's home still smelled of chemicals and death. His men wore masks, yet some couldn't keep from gagging. There were photos on the walls, each child smiling, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Beside every photo, a number, the same numbers written in the confession diary. 100 pages, 100 lives. The diary detailed every crime, where he found them, how he lured them, and how he disposed of them. It even mentioned the acid drums, how long they took to dissolve, and where he dumped the remains. Every line was written with calm precision. No emotion, no guilt. The investigators moved from place to place, tracing names and records, speaking with street children and orphanage workers. Some recognized his photo immediately. He used to give us food, they said, and take some kids with him. They never came back. In every alley, whispers began spreading. Stories of the man who hunted the forgotten, the lost, the invisible. Parents wept in police stations, clutching the last photos of their missing sons. Each name matched another page in Javed's diary. As the police pieced the truth together, Javed's name became a curse. The government announced a nationwide manhunt. His photo was printed in every newspaper, broadcast on every channel, and pasted on every wall. But Javed was clever. He had vanished before the first officer reached his gate. He knew the system, its loopholes, its blind spots. He moved like a ghost through the city, changing taxis, hiding in mosques, sometimes walking among the very people searching for him. Then came the letters. The police station began receiving envelopes, each written in his calm, slanted handwriting. Inside were short notes. Stop searching. You'll find nothing I don't want you to. I am watching. Justice will end where I decide. There are more like me. You just haven't looked hard enough. Each note was dated, timed, and placed where the police would find it. As if Javed was leading the hunt himself. As the days passed, the fear in Lahore deepened. People locked their doors earlier, avoided the streets, and whispered his name only in private. The hunt for Javed Iqbal had become more than an investigation. It was a war between a killer who saw himself as righteous and a city desperate to believe it was still safe. But what no one knew then, not the police, not the public, was that Javed wasn't running forever. He had a plan, and it would leave Pakistan frozen in disbelief. 2 weeks after Javed Iqbal's disappearance, Lahore began to breathe again, slowly, uncertainly. The news channels had moved from panic to speculation, police morale was thinning, and Iskar Ali hadn't slept in days. Every lead ended in silence. Every witness retracted their words. It was as though the man had dissolved into the shadows he once used to hide his victims. Then, on a gray January morning, the impossible happened that a courier walked into the office of Daily Pakistan, carrying a small sealed envelope. Inside was a single note and a set of keys. The note read, "I am Javed Iqbal. I will surrender today, 3 p.m., at the offices of this newspaper. I want to tell my story myself." The editor froze. He read it twice, 3 times. Then he called the police. Within hours, every major law enforcement unit in Lahore was surrounding the building. At exactly 3 p.m., a man walked through the newspaper's glass doors. Calm, silent, wearing a simple brown shalwar kameez and dark glasses. No weapon, no resistance. He raised his hands and said, "I am Javed Iqbal. I killed 100 children. Arrest me." The world seemed to stop. Detective Iskar was among the first to arrive. He looked into the man's eyes. They were empty, flat, like two lifeless mirrors. "Why come back?" he asked quietly. Javed smiled faintly. "Because I wanted to see justice from the front row," he said. The interrogation that followed became the most chilling in Pakistan's history. In the small gray room of the Lahore police headquarters, Javed Iqbal described every detail with perfect recall. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He spoke as if recounting a routine day, how he chose his victims, how he kept records, how he dissolved the remains in acid to erase evidence. But then he said something no one expected. "I didn't kill them all for pleasure," he said. "I wanted to show this country how easy it is to ignore its children. I was the mirror. You just didn't want to look." Reporters outside the station fought to capture every word. His confession became a storm, a wound in Pakistan's conscience. For the first time, the country saw its street children not as nameless beggars, but as the forgotten victims of a system that never cared. The court proceedings began swiftly. Each day, the courtroom overflowed with reporters, parents, and citizens who came to see the man who turned Lahore into a graveyard of innocence. When the verdict was finally read, the judge's voice shook with fury. Javed Iqbal is sentenced to death, to be executed in the same way he murdered his victims. 100 times over. Gasps filled the courtroom. It was the harshest sentence ever passed in Pakistan's criminal history, one designed to be symbolic, a punishment meant to echo every lost soul. But Javed only smiled. "I told you," he said softly to the reporters. "Justice ends where I decide." A month later, before the sentence could be carried out, prison guards found Javed Iqbal dead in his cell, hanged by a piece of cloth torn from his bedsheet. The official report said suicide. But Asghar Ali never believed it. The cell cameras had been disabled that night. The guards on duty had been replaced hours earlier. There was no sign of struggle, no marks of resistance. As if someone had made sure his silence would be permanent, Lahore moved on. The fear faded. The alleys grew loud again. But every time a child went missing, every time a news report spoke of a body found near the canal, people whispered the same words. Maybe he was right. Maybe there are more like him. The winter fog lifted, but Lahore never felt the same again. The city that once buzzed with life now carried a ghost in every alley, an invisible chill that lingered even in sunlight. The house on Ravi Road, where Javed Iqbal had kept his acid drums and diary, was sealed off by police tape, but no one dared to walk near it. Stray dogs barked at the gate at night. Locals crossed the street to avoid even looking at it. Detective Asghar Ali stood there often, long after the case was closed. He would stare at the rusted gate, replaying every conversation, every clue that should have been caught earlier. To him, the case wasn't victory. It was failure wrapped in procedure. 100 children gone, one killer caught too late, and a system that had learned nothing. The government promised reforms. New child protection laws were drafted, street patrols increased, shelters opened across the city. But months later, the shelters were understaffed, the funds misused, and the streets were still full of hungry faces. The press had moved on to the next scandal. The cameras were gone. The grief remained in the neighborhoods where those children once begged for food. Mothers still left empty plates at dinner, small symbols of absence. Each plate a grave, each night a prayer unanswered. The parents had no graves to visit, no bodies to bury, only numbers and records in a diary. Javed's diary became evidence, then archive, then legend. Some pages were sealed by the government, marked as classified, but whispers spread about other names written there, names of men in power who might have known, who might have helped cover his crimes. Asghar received anonymous letters, each one stamped with the same symbol Javed once used to mark his pages, a small spiral drawn in black ink. Some letters hinted that Javed hadn't worked alone. Others claimed his suicide was orchestrated to bury those connections forever. The detective followed each clue in silence, walking through the underbelly of the city, abandoned buildings, canal banks, forgotten factories. The deeper he went, the more he realized Lahore had many Javed Iqbals, men in the shadows, preying on those no one would miss. He began to understand the cruel symmetry of it all. Javed had called himself a mirror, and maybe that was the truest part of his madness. He was what society created, the reflection of neglect, poverty, and corruption. His evil wasn't born in isolation, it was nurtured by silence. Years later, when Isker retired, he wrote in his final report, "Justice was served, but peace was not. The city buried its guilt under concrete, but it still bleeds beneath." That line was never published. The file was marked confidential and locked away, but the story of Javed Iqbal didn't die. It lived in whispers, in documentaries, in late-night stories told by cab drivers who swore they saw him walking near the canal. The man who confessed, died, and somehow never left. And every few years, when another missing child's face appeared on the news, someone somewhere would say, "He said there were more like him." It began 16 years after Javed Iqbal's death. Lahore had changed, glass towers replacing old brick, motorbikes filling streets that once echoed with horse carts. But beneath the neon glow and modern chaos, darkness still waited. Detective Isker Ali, older now, spent his retirement quietly teaching forensic psychology at a small police academy. His days were filled with lectures, his nights with silence. He never married, never moved far from the city that had defined him. The memories were too deep to leave behind. One night, while grading papers in his office, he received an unmarked envelope. No return address, no handwriting, just a single photograph inside. It showed a small, dirty alley in the Anarkali district. A boy, no older than 12, stood barefoot, his face pale and scared. Behind him, on the wall, drawn in dark red paint, the same spiral symbol Javed used to sign his diary pages. On the back of the photo, a single line was written in blue ink: "History never dies. It only changes hands." Isker froze. For years, he had feared this, that someone would pick up Javed's legacy, inspired by his infamy. But something about the photo felt deliberate, almost taunting. It wasn't just a threat, it was an invitation. Within days, reports began surfacing, missing street children, all from similar neighborhoods where Javed once preyed. At first, police dismissed it as coincidence. But then, they found the first body. A boy, aged 11, buried behind an abandoned school near the Ravi River. His face covered with a cloth. On the wall nearby, the same spiral drawn again. Isker came out of retirement immediately, unofficially working alongside his former student, Inspector Saad Rahman. Together, they revisited old case files, crime scene photographs, and witness statements. The patterns were disturbingly similar. The timing, the victim profiles, even the psychological staging. But this killer was smarter. He didn't dissolve bodies. He left them to be found, as if sending a message. "You tried to erase the past. I will make you remember it." The city panicked again. News channels brought Javed Iqbal's name back into every living room. The public whispered about a ghost returned. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Isker knew better. This wasn't Javed. This was someone who wanted to become him. Late one night, sitting in his dark office, he found another envelope. Inside was a recording tape and a note. "I'm finishing what he started, Ustad. You taught me to understand monsters. Now I am one." It was Saad's voice. The realization hit like ice. His own protege, the man he had trained to read the minds of killers, had turned into one. Somewhere in Lahore's endless sprawl, the shadow had found a new host, and once again, the hunt began. The night Isker discovered the truth, rain fell hard on Lahore, a violent downpour that drowned the streets and blurred the neon lights into trembling ghosts. He sat alone in his office, tape recorder spinning, replaying the voice that should never have been there. "You taught me to understand monsters. Now I am one." Saad Rahman. his best student, his pride. Now, his cursed out Oscar's hands shook as he replayed the tape again, searching for anything, background noise, echoes, something. After hours, he caught it. Faint train horns, the whirring hum of electric poles, and a muezzin's call from a nearby mosque. It wasn't much, but to Oscar, it was a map that he knew that sound. It came from Kot Lokpat, the old industrial side of the city, quiet, grimy, full of abandoned factories. A place forgotten by most, but not by monsters. The next morning, he drove there in silence, the city still asleep. The streets were lined with rusting gates and fading signs from old textile mills. He parked by a narrow warehouse, its walls stained with soot. The smell of rot hung in the air as he stepped inside. Dust. Silence. And then, the smell hit him again, stronger this time. Under the dim light of his flashlight, Oscar saw them, dozens of children's shoes scattered across the floor. Some new, some caked in mud. On the far wall, drawn in dark crimson, was the same spiral, larger, more chaotic, as if painted in rage, and under it, a line in dripping letters. Every legend deserves a student. Then he heard it, the sound of slow clapping echoing through the factory. You found me, Ustad. Saad emerged from the shadows, dressed in plain clothes, eyes sunken but steady, a faint smile curling on his lips. He looked more like a ghost than a man. Oscar Sahib, he said quietly. You once told me Javed was misunderstood, that his mind wasn't evil, it was broken. But you were wrong. He was free. He became what the world feared most. And no one forgot him. Oscar's voice broke. Saad, you don't know what you're doing. Saad tilted his head. Don't I? I've read every file you kept locked away. His diaries. The drawings. You wanted to understand him. I wanted to become him. That's the difference. Oscar stepped forward. He killed innocents. And the world forgot them, Saad whispered. But they remembered him. A silence. Only the sound of rain hitting the metal roof. Saad pulled something from his pocket. A folded note, yellowed with age. I found this in your drawer. His last words before he died. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable, Javed Iqbal's. There will always be another me. Saad looked up, his eyes burning. He was right. He turned and walked toward the back door. Oscar raised his gun, his hand trembling, heart pounding. Stop, Saad. Don't make me. Before he could finish, a sudden explosion of glass. Saad threw something small and metallic. Smoke filled the room. When it cleared, Saad was gone. Only his voice remained, echoing faintly through the factory. You can't stop a story once it's begun, Ustad. Oscar dropped to his knees among the shoes and ashes, the tape still spinning in his hand. The monster was reborn, not through blood, but through memory. And this time, the city wouldn't get another warning. The news broke quietly at first, a small column buried deep within the Lahore Chronicle. Missing boy, age 11, last seen near Kot Lokpat industrial zone. A few days later, another headline followed. Then another. Within 3 weeks, 5 children had vanished, all from poor neighborhoods, all under eerily similar circumstances. Inspector Isker sat in his car outside one of the victims' homes, the mother's wailing echoing from inside. He couldn't move. He had seen this before. The same age range, the same disappearance pattern, the same damn helplessness. But this time, it wasn't Javed Iqbal. This time, it was someone he had taught. That night, the rain returned, heavy and relentless. He spread photographs on his desk, each child's face illuminated under a single flickering lamp. He connected their home locations on a map, drawing red circles. A pattern slowly emerged, forming a crescent, leading back toward Kot Lokpat. In the center of that crescent stood an abandoned school. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't inform the department. This was personal. As he entered the school, his flashlight caught the chalkboard still covered in faded lessons. Alphabets, math problems, children's scribbles. But on one wall, something new had been drawn. the same red spiral, massive, smeared like a wound. Beneath it, a row of mannequins stood, dressed in school uniforms, their faces painted white. Around their necks hung name tags, the names of missing children, and on one mannequin, written in fresh red ink, was a note. Even the innocent must learn. A sudden creak, footsteps above. Oscar climbed the staircase slowly, gun drawn. The air was thick with dust and rot. Then he saw it, a classroom lit by a single lamp. On the teacher's desk, Saad sat calmly, flipping through a child's drawing book. "You came," he said without looking up. Oscar's voice trembled. "Where are they, Saad?" Saad smiled faintly. "Safe. For now. I'm only teaching them what the world refuses to fear. Obedience. Truth." He turned a page, a crude drawing of a house, a sun, a smiling stick figure family. This boy drew his father hitting him. The world would call that discipline. I call it the first cut. He stood up slowly. "You once said monsters are made, not born. You were right. But you never asked who's making them." Oscar's gun tightened. "You think this justifies murder?" Saad stepped closer. "No, Ustad. This completes the lesson." Lightning flashed through the broken window. For a moment, Oscar saw the face of his old student, terrified, broken, longing for approval. Then the light shifted, and all that remained was the killer. Saad raised his hand. Something glinted. A small blade, carved crudely from glass. "Shoot me if you must," he whispered. "But if you do, you'll only prove that I was right." A pause. The rain pounded louder, drowning the silence. Then, a faint sound. A child's sob, coming from below the floor. Oscar's heart stopped. He looked down. A trapdoor. He kicked it open, a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. Inside, faint figures moved. He could hear chains. Whispers. "Please." The children were there. He turned. Saad was gone. Only the sound of his footsteps fading into the rain. Oscar rushed into the tunnel, calling out, "It's all right. You're safe now." But as his flashlight caught their faces, pale, trembling, covered in chalk dust, one of them whispered something that froze his blood. "He said you'd come. He said you'd finish his work." And then, from the shadows of the tunnel, another spiral began to appear, glowing faintly in red, drawn with what looked like blood. The children stepped back, trembling. The spiral pulsed like a living thing. Oscar realized in horror, this wasn't just a copycat. This was a ritual, something Saad believed would immortalize his legacy, and Javits, forever. The city had given birth to monsters once again, and now they were multiplying. The tunnels beneath the city were not meant for the living. The air was thick with mildew and forgotten screams, echoing faintly against the brick walls that had witnessed things no sun had ever touched. Water dripped rhythmically, every drop carving silence into something heavier. Inspector Oscar's flashlight sliced through the darkness, its beam trembling slightly, as if afraid of what it might reveal. The smell of rust, sewage, and something older, something human, lingered. The passage twisted endlessly, lined with decaying pipes and discarded relics from a world that never looked beneath its own feet. Every few steps, Oscar marked the wall with chalk. It was the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. His radio had long gone silent. Interference, or perhaps something worse. Above him, the world carried on with its indifferent noise. Horns, vendors, prayers. But down here, time had no shape that a faint sound stirred ahead. Not footsteps, scraping. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging something heavy across the wet floor. Oscar froze. His flashlight quivered, catching a fleeting reflection, a shape, then nothing. He steadied his breath, following the sound. He came to an iron gate half buried in the earth. Rusted chains hung from it, snapped apart. He crouched, shining his light through. Beyond lay a small chamber, its walls covered in faint drawings. Faces, dozens of them, each painted crudely in ash, their eyes gouged out to eye in the center, a wooden table. And on it, a stack of photographs. Victims, all of them missing persons from Lahore, each one marked with a date and strange symbol burned into the corner. His pulse throbbed in his ears. This wasn't random. It was ritual, calculated. Then, a whisper, soft, almost tender, "Usker." He swung around, light cutting through the dark. Nothing. His throat tightened. He turned back to the table and froze. The photos were gone. Every single one. That something dripped behind him. He slowly raised the flashlight. There, on the ceiling, hung a body, strung upside down, its face half-eaten, eyes open. A fresh carving burned into its chest, at a mark identical to the one on the photos. And from somewhere deep in the tunnels, a laugh echoed. Low, distorted, human yet not. It wasn't just a killer. It was something that had grown in the shadows of the city, something that had learned to hide in plain sight. Usker stepped back slowly, every instinct screaming. But the path behind him was gone. The chalk marks he had drawn, erased, the walls, rearranged. The tunnel was changing around him, breathing, alive. And for the first time in his life, Inspector Usker realized the hunt had turned. The city above was waking, unaware that beneath its streets, an ancient hunt was reaching its end. Dawn broke weakly over Lahore, its light unable to pierce the underworld where Inspector Usker now wandered, trapped, disoriented, and alone. The air was heavy, each breath tasting of blood and dust. His flashlight flickered, dying slowly as if it too refused to witness what came next. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber, half-flooded, walls carved with countless symbols. They spiraled inward, all converging at a single point. A throne of bones, crudely fashioned from human remains. Upon it sat the figure that had haunted every crime scene for months. The killer, the one whispered about in morgues and police halls, known only by the mark he left behind. He wasn't what Usker expected. No mask, no monster from a tale, just a man. Ordinary, almost fragile. His face calm, his eyes distant, as if he had long since made peace with the darkness. The walls around them seemed to pulse with memory. Bones of the nameless victims filled the corners, each arranged with precision. There was a strange reverence in the layout, not chaos, but ritual. Every murder a message, every death a confession. Usker's mind replayed the investigation. The missing people, the cryptic letters, the bodies left like warnings. He realized then that the killer had never been hiding. He had been showing them the truth, the corruption buried beneath the city, the rot that grew behind uniforms and holy words. In this chamber of bones, the killer had built a shrine, not to evil, but to balance. He believed the city itself was alive, breathing through the blood of the forgotten. The deeper Usker looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't madness. It was devotion. He took a step forward, and the floor cracked beneath him. The chamber groaned, old, unstable, a living tomb. Water gushed in through broken walls, filling the pit with cold, murky filth. The killer didn't move. He sat still, eyes closed, accepting the collapse as if it were destiny. Usker fought to stay above the rising flood, clutching the remains of the staircase. His flashlight slipped into the black water, its beam dying forever. The chamber's symbols glowed faintly under the surface, ancient, furious, alive. The killer vanished beneath the surge, swallowed whole. The throne shattered, bones scattered like leaves in a storm. When rescuers finally found Usker days later, he was half-conscious near an abandoned drainage tunnel. He remembered nothing of how he escaped. Only the mark burned faintly into his wrist. The case was closed. Files sealed. But months later, when new bodies appeared, arranged the same way, with the same mark, the city whispered again. Some said the killer survived. Others said the darkness found a new vessel. But Usker knew the truth. It was neither. The city itself had simply chosen another. And beneath the streets of Lahore, where silence breathes and bones remember, the hunt began again.